Whenever you're ready, Madam Clerk.
Through you, Your Worship, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest, and if so, please state the general nature thereof.
Councillor Vasilakos.
On the council agenda, item 9.2.2, number 21 and number 29, I'm both a volunteer on Cycle Stratford for one of their events, and I sit on the Community Foundations Allocations Committee.
Thank you. Any others? Seeing none.
Moving on to item 3, adoption of the minutes, and there's a motion that the minutes of the regular meeting of council dated February 10th be adopted as printed.
Moved by Councillor Gaffney and second by Councillor Beatty. The minutes be adopted. Discussion? Not all in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried.
Item 4 is adoption of the addendum, and there is an addendum that's been placed on your desk to add item 7.8 and an additional item to item 9.2.1, and the motion is to adopt the agenda as printed.
Councillor Ritzman moving, seconded by Councillor Ingram. Discussion? Not all in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried.
Moving on to item 5, report of the Committee of the Whole in camera session. Item 5.1 is from the February 10th session, which is to consider an appointment to Festival Hydro Inc. Board of Directors. And there's a staff recommendation that Susan Nickel be appointed for a 4-year term to December 31st, 2024.
Moved by Councillor Beatty, seconded by Councillor Bunting. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried.
Item 5.2, just prior to this evening's meeting, an in-camera session was held to discuss 4 matters concerning the following items. An item related to labor relations or employee negotiations, another item relating to labor relations or employee negotiations, a position plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on by the municipality, and the 4th item relates to advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege and a position plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on by the municipality. And at the in-camera session, direction was given on all items.
Thank you.
There are no hearings of deputations and presentations, so we'll move on to item 7, orders of the day. Item 7.1 is to proclaim September 8th, 2020 as Change Her World Day in the city of Stratford.
Moved by Councillor Ingram, second by Councillor Henderson. Discussion? Not all in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried.
Item 7.2 is a resolution for an RFP approval, and there's a staff recommendation that the low bid from CFC Supply in the amount of $113,904, including HST, be approved for the design, supply, and installation of a 200 niche columbarium in Avondale Cemetery.
Moved by Councillor Gaffney, seconded by Councillor Vasilakos. Councillor Gaffney.
Through Your Worship, I wonder if we could find out what the numbers were for the other contractors, from the other contractors.
Mr.
So
Singh.
through the mayor, the other contractor, there were 2 other bids, and the next contractor was $129,947 and $186,450.
Thank you.
Anything further? Not all in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried.
Item 7.3 is a resolution regarding a housing maintenance van, and there is a staff recommendation that the report be received, that the capital purchase in the amount of $65,000, including HST, be approved, and that the purchase be initially funded from the City of Stratford's Social Services Capital Reserve.
Moved by Councillor Bunting, seconded by Councillor Vasilakos. Discussion? Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I was just going to ask them the price. I bought a pan at our company, and I paid almost half of what they were charging there, but I just think that's an excessive amount for a van, but it's just my opinion.
Yep, Mr.
Yeah,
Delover.
through your worship, that came from our fleet supervisor, and it's based on a full-size van that you can walk in, so it's a higher van. It's similar to the vans that they already have in social services.
Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried.
Moving on to item 7.4, which is in regards to our purchasing policy for an emergency purchase. And there's a staff recommendation that council receive the report titled Purchasing Policy, Emergency Purchase of One Heavy-Duty One-Ton Truck with Dump Box and Sander Unit for Community Services Parks Division, as per the Stratford Purchasing Policy.
Councillor Beatty and Councillor Henderson, moving in seconding. Any questions? If not, all those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried.
Moving on to item 7.5, which is a resolution for an amending agreement, and there is a staff recommendation that the city enter into an amending agreement with the Automotive Materials Stewardship, Inc. for the collection and recycling of used automotive containers, and that the mayor and clerk or their respective delegates be authorized to sign the amending agreement.
Councillor Vasilakos and Councillor Ingram moving and seconding. Discussion? Not all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Item 7.6 is with regards to the Community Transportation Pilot Project, and there is a staff recommendation that council accepts the proposal from Voyago in principle for the Intercity Community Transportation Pilot Project for a 6-day service with the option to expand to 7-day services as determined by the city and its partners. That council's acceptance of the Voyago proposal is conditional upon the entering into of a local partnership agreement with Stratford, St. Mary's, and North Perth councils, and that staff be directed to negotiate a service agreement with Voyago for the Intercity Community Transportation Pilot Project for the consideration of council.
Moved by Councillor Ritzma, seconded by Councillor Gaffney. Discussion. If not, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Moving on to item 7.7, which is regards to the Transit Capital Plan update, and there is a staff recommendation for the information of council.
Moved by Councillor Henderson, seconded by Councillor Ingram. Be received to Councillor Seven.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I know we had some discussion about electric buses and the possibilities there. I'm just, given that we declared a climate emergency, I just am a little concerned that I just wanted to comment my concern about the fact that we're committing to 6 conventional 40-foot buses over the next 3 years instead of, that's quite a timeline before we look at alternatives. So I just wanted to comment about that.
The options could come forward that council could look at other buses, but we'd be responsible, I believe, for any difference in price over and above what would be covered under the federal provincial program.
Right, okay, thank you.
Councillor Henderson.
I actually understood that when I asked that question before, and he came back and said that we would have to resubmit the grant. So that's why we couldn't do that, pay the difference. We had to follow what we had applied for in the grant, otherwise we wouldn't get the grant.
We can seek clarification, but in other grant programs, they've always allowed you to qualify for what you submitted. And if there was any expense over and above, they had always in the past, but we can ask that question. Ms. Thompson.
I already asked that.
I also just wanted to point out that since council made the climate change declaration at the last council meeting, staff have met across the departments, and I can say that electric transit buses are on the table for discussion, and there is a further report coming back which will include that. So staff are very aware of council's intent to look into the electric vehicles, including fleet vehicles, transit vehicles, but we want to gather more up-to-date information and bring this forward in a package of other information for your consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Vasilakos.
I was just going to, I had made a note about that on-demand service might be a good place to start if we wanted to pilot an electric vehicle, to pilot it on maybe something that isn't so dependent on routes and times being accurate, and having a bus in service for the entire day, because some of the technology is about being able to recharge. So I was just, when I was looking at this for opportunities to start looking at electric technology earlier than later, was that on-demand piece of it possibly.
Thank you. Councillor Seven.
Yeah, I also wanted to ask about the on-demand service. Is that something that will come to council before it is implemented, the on-demand pilot project?
It was applied to as part of our federal provincial opportunity to run an on-demand pilot. We're hoping that they will fund part of it. It will then come back to council if they say yes around any of the tweaks. It's looking at, in the first phase was just to try Sundays to increase the number of hours and the routes available, and then if it worked, to look at Saturdays and evenings as it progressed. But council would have a say in the service delivery level.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? If not, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Turning to your addenda, item 7.8 is a resolution regarding the public consultation process for the proposed municipal accommodation tax, and there is a staff recommendation that the consultation process described in the report be approved by council.
Councillor Gaffney, moving and second by Councillor Clifford. Discussion. Not all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
There was no business for which previous notice has been given, so move on to item 9, reports of the standing committees. Item 9.1 is the report of the Infrastructure, Transportation, and Safety Committee, and there are 9 items listed for consideration as follows. Item 9.1.1 and 9.1.2 relate to the amending of the snow and ice removal bylaw. Item 9.1.3 relates to the fluoride action plan update. Item 9.1.4 is with regards to signage at intersections with one-way streets. Item 9.1.5 relates to a 40 km/h speed limits on local residential roads. Item 9.1.6 is with regards to visibility on a lone ave at Brown Street. Item 9.1.7 is with regards to access aisle, no parking signs. And item 9.1.8 is a request for exemption from the noise control bylaw for the 2020 Movies Under the Stars event at the Bruce Hotel.
All right. Mover for such, Councillor Vasilakos, and seconded Councillor Seven. Discussion. Councillor Ingram and then Councillor Vasilakos.
Can we take 916 separately, please?
Yes. Councillor Vasilakos?
I was just going to say that some of those items are out of order from what we have on East Cribe. There's just one item that got missed in there.
Through the worship, my apologies, we're missing item 9.1.4, which is the Glendon Road Always Stop and Pedestrian Safety Review.
Yeah, I just wanted included.
Thank you. All right, so we'll take all of them, 9, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we will, and 7, 8, 9, collectively, we'll take item 916 separately. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Item 916 has been moved and seconded. Discussion, Councillor Ingram?
So I'm going to repeat some of my comments from the subcommittee meeting on this item. And my comments from the subcommittee meeting, for those of you who didn't read in the minutes, relate to, number one, police not being in favor of this item. And originally, they weren't in favor at all. And the second report that came to us said that they would try to increase their presence within this area of the city for the pilot study. We all know that they have many, many other things happening and other issues and higher priority concerns. So their presence within this pilot study area is going to be intermittent at best. We asked them to increase their presence at the Huntington and Huron Street area when we were having the issues with the school crossing guards. They were there when they could be, and they weren't there when they had other pressing matters. And I have a feeling that that's going to be the same thing with this study area. Secondly, we have the digital speed board, and the data that has come out of some of the more recent postings. For instance, going northbound on Alone Ave, there were 197,041 trips over 69 days that were logged on that speed board. 95,702 of those trips were above 60 kilometers per hour, and 29 of those trips were above 100 kilometers per hour. So 48.5% of those trips exceeded the speed limit. And those are people that are repeat travelers on that road that can see that board right there telling them to either slow down or posting their speed, and they're not changing their habits. In a residential zone, the board was posted for northbound traffic on Thomas Street. There was 12,845 trips over 21 days, and 564 of those were above 50 kilometers per hour, and 65 of those trips were above 70 kilometers per hour. So again, that's within a residential neighborhood, fairly short area between two curves, and people are traveling that road repeatedly, can see the speed being posted. Either they have to slow down or they're over the speed limit, and they're not doing it. So this study is contingent upon a couple of things. It's contingent upon people changing human behavior and contingent upon enforcement. And we don't have either one of those. Even when you can see the sign posted and the digital board right there telling you to slow down, people aren't doing it. And so I think that this study, as I have said in the subcommittee, I think we need to wait on the municipalities that are already moving forward with the pilot study. Kitchener was an example. They're already in the midst of doing this pilot study. There were 2 other municipalities. I think we need to wait, see what they found, see what worked for them, and then try to implement some of that here instead of forging ahead with the same thing that other municipalities are doing, knowing that we're kind of setting it up to fail because we don't have the enforcement and we don't have human behavior change.
Thank you. Councillor Vasilakos?
I'm just going to point out that, so one of the issues around this is enforcement, and I have to say, if we do part of all traffic problems. I would say that the data that we're getting back means that we do need to actually have a conversation about enforcement. Because, and so I would say that this pilot study, where we can actually focus some, I'm sure the police will focus some enforcement, we're going to have to do something. If those are the speeds that we're seeing in a residential street, something has to happen. And so one of the parts of this is that part and parcel of reducing it to 40 is also an education campaign around the purpose for this, talking to all the people who live in that residential neighborhood about the purpose of it and how it's going to get done. There's a communication piece. And it's also that we have formal traffic calming program within that area where we actually start to do some of the physical things that are known to actually reduce speeds. So this isn't, so I actually think it's a comprehensive way to try to reduce speeds on those residential streets. And it's starting in a neighborhood. I think that it was well chosen because it already has some of those traffic calming features that are going to be easier to do. I know that other places are doing pilot studies, but I think doing our own and seeing what works within our own community and what kind of communication works that we can roll out, I think makes a lot of sense. And the other part of it too is if you look at the number of communities in Ontario that are actually going to 40s in their residential streets, this is going to become the new norm. So I think taking an opportunity to do a pilot to figure out how to make it work is a really good idea because that's the direction that most communities are going in.
Okay, Councillor Clifford and Councillor Seth.
I don't support the item on the floor here. I think if we want to slow the speed down, we either have police enforcement or radar enforcement. I was following people, I followed a bus that's owned by the city of Stratford on a loan, 50 kilometers. The bus was going 68 kilometers an hour because obviously he had to get back to Stratford, or get back to City Hall here. So I think if we want to slow people down, we have to enforcement. To put a speed limit up makes no difference. It doesn't stop people slowing down on other streets that we arbitrarily put 40 kilometers an hour on. So I think it's a waste of time and money if we're not going to have proper enforcement.
Councillor Sabin and Councillor Vasilakos.
I do support the motion. I wish Councillor Burback were here. She did cite some very interesting stats and studies about this. I just wanted to say that the way, I guess I'm just reading between the lines about the data, and at the subcommittee meeting, it's obvious people do speed, and we can't have enforcement all the time, and people are going to speed regardless. That's unfortunate. But what we're missing is that most of the people did obey the speed limit, and at subcommittee in the report there was data about 50-kilometer speed limit zones and 40-kilometer speed limit zones, and the people in the 40-kilometer zones were going slower. They weren't going 40, they were going over 40, but they weren't going, the 50 ones were going over 50 and the 40 were going over 40, but the 40 ones were indeed going significantly slower. So I think this is a good thing, and I think it's a good way to approach it with different measures, as someone else mentioned, and just in a certain area of the city.
Thank you. Councillor Vasilakos.
And I'm going to piggyback on that a little bit because I'll say that the city of Kitchener actually looked at their accident rates, both pedestrian, cyclists, and car-on-car accident rates in their 40s and their 50s, and they found that they were dramatically lower in the 40s, which is why they proceeded with a pilot that does 5 different residential neighborhoods on how to roll it out. We already have the data that shows if you can actually, that simply reducing the speed limit in a residential neighborhood does depress all of the speeds. It actually does do that and especially over time with enforcement. And I would say that because we're not just reducing the speed, we're taking additional measures to do education. And the police has said they will try to enforce, and if there's a pilot I want to know how other places are doing a pilot and they're asking for increased enforcement to try to make it happen, and their police forces are, and we are at some point going to have to acknowledge the car accidents, injuries from car accidents are really high, whether they're car-on-car or cars, are really high on our injury list and the safety issues that we have in our community. And I know we have a lot of other safety issues in our community, but but vehicular accidents are quite high, and at some point enforcement's going to have to actually come into play on this. And the police has said they'll support the pilot, and I think we should give them the opportunity to do so.
Okay. Councillor Henderson.
Well, I'm a little bit confused by that last statement about that our accident rates are quite high, because I remember asking, because there was a issue on Facebook with people saying that Church and Cambria are having more accidents than the rest of the city, and the police came back with a report that, I can't remember the figure, but it was quite low for a city our size, especially considering all the tourists that we have in our town. You know, around 700,000 in the summer months and spring and fall a little bit. I can't remember, I want to say it worked out to an average of 3 or something, like it was very, Stratford was good at whatever accidents they're having, I don't know how else to say it. That you're saying that it's quite high is shocking to me.
No, I'm saying that if you look, sorry, I'm just through the mayor, if I could. I'm not saying that Stratford's is particularly high. I'm saying if you look at injuries in general,
Okay.
right? If you look at injuries in general, some of the high, if you look at rates and accidents, car accidents and pedestrians and cyclists are quite high. I'm saying the province and the idea of Vision Zero is moving towards communities where we decrease those speeds, also for active transportation and encouraging active transportation and getting kids active. We have the acute idea of accidents happening. We also have an accident waiting to happen is a generation of children that do not walk to school and aren't active. And that is a slow-moving public health crisis that's coming at us, and this goes into it as well. And so I'm saying that in general, the province is moving towards making residential neighborhoods more amenable to walking and cycling. So why wouldn't we actually try to promote this?
Okay. So item 916 has been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Simon?
Can I ask for a recorded vote, please? Sure.
Whenever you're ready, Madam Clerk.
So starting
wanted to
with,
say something.
through the, your worship, sorry.
Pardon me, Councillor Henderson?
Graham had his hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment or maybe see what staff think. I do believe that the province is allowing municipalities to have photo radar, which is a standalone thing that sits by the road and takes pictures, posts the speed, and you send the registered owner a ticket for whatever the speed was. That was in the news back a few months back. I don't know where it's at the moment, but maybe staff could have a look at that and see if it's feasible and how movable it is from one location to another. Because if everybody knows where it's going to be there, and it's going to be there for the next 6 months, then they behave when you're going past it, and then.
Mr. Delovic, do you have an update on that?
Yeah, through the chair. When we last reported on it, we talked about you use photo radar in community safety zones. You can't make the whole city a community safety zone. It has to be done in particular areas they're talking about, you know, in school areas and other where seniors may congregate. So we are preparing a report coming back to council that will talk about where we can use the photo radar, what areas, and throughout the city where we can declare these community safety zones and then move the photo radar around to those areas.
Thank you.
All right. We'll call the question whenever you're ready, Madam Clerk.
So through you, your worship, beginning with Councillor Seven, please state whether you are in support or opposed to the motion on the floor relating to item 9.1.6. Councillor Seven.
Support?
Councillor Bunting.
Support.
Councillor Vasilakos.
Support.
Councillor Ingram.
Opposed.
Mayor Matheson.
Support.
Councillor Henderson.
I'll say support.
Councillor Beatty.
Opposed.
Councillor Ritzma. Opposed. Councillor Clifford.
Opposed.
Councillor Gaffney.
Motion's defeated, 5-5. Next item.
Moving on to item 9.2, which is the report of the Finance and Labor Relations Committee. And the items listed for consideration relate to the 2020 Community Grants Evaluation Committee recommendations for one-time and multi-year funding. As the recommendations are quite lengthy, I will not read them, but I will draw your eyes to the addendum with respect to item 9.2.1. There is an additional recommendation from the committee motion that a 2020 grant request of $10,000 from Feline Friends Network of Stratford to support of its trap, neuter, return adoption program and low-income program be denied.
So moved.
Seconded, Councillor Henderson, moved by Councillor Clifford. Yes, you.
And I have a
speak.
question. So I'm confused by this report of the Finance and Labor Relations Committee. Are they just reaffirming that they looked at it again and they're still denying it? Is that what that means? Because we already were denying it.
Through your worship, so the specific recommendation about Feline Friends did not make it into item 9.2.1 as listed on the agenda. So we're just bringing it forward that it was approved at the committee level and it should be included with that item.
Oh, okay.
Councillor Seven.
Just as a question of process, is it possible to take the item on the addenda separate from the motion, or is it all collective?
We can separate 9.2.1.
Could we do that, please, then? Thank you.
From the addenda. All right. All those in favor of 9.2.1? Opposed, if any? It's carried. We'll take 9.2.1 addenda item separately. It's been moved and seconded, though. Discussion. Councillor Henderson?
So my only discussion is, once we pass this tonight, then the letters are going to be going to them and then they have the right to appeal then, right?
Correct.
Okay.
All right. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Thank you.
So through your worship, now we need to move on to item 9.2.2.
Moved by Councillor Clifford and seconded by Councillor Gaffney, which is the 2020 Community Grants Evaluation Committee one-time and multi-year funding. Discussion? Not all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Moving to item 10, notice of intent. Item 10.1 is notice of consideration. And at the March 9th, 2020 regular council meeting, Councilors Vasilakos and Ingram intend to put forward the following motion for consideration. In order to clean up our industrial land designation and inventory, requesting the following motions be considered. A, that city staff identify vacant, unusable industrial land and identify land that is suitable for rezoning to create additional open space and identify parcels that may be appropriate for projects that reduce our carbon footprint, example, solar panel installations and woodlot creation. 3, redesignate lands that are currently industrial which have recreational uses, hydro corridors, SWN ponds, and other similar uses. And B, that city staff identify vacant, unserviced industrial land that may be divested by the corporation.
That's a notice for the March 9th meeting. Next item.
Moving on to item 10, reading of the bylaws. There are 4 bylaws listed for consideration as follows. Item 11.1 is to amend the appointments bylaw. Item 11.2 is to amend the traffic and parking bylaw. Item 11.3 is an acceptance of proposals for a 200 niche columbarium in Avondale Cemetery. And item 11.4 is the amending agreement with Automotive Material Stewardship, Inc., and these bylaws could be taken collectively upon unanimous vote of council present.
Councillor Beatty moving, seconded Councillor Ingram. To be taken collectively. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? I'll declare that unanimous. We'll go to first and second reading of bylaws 11.1, 2, 3, and 4. Moved by Councillor Bunting, second by Councillor Seven, that the bylaws 11.1 through 4 be read a first and second time. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Third and final reading is Councillor Gaffney and Councillor Henderson for bylaws 11.1, 2, 3, and 4. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? And that carries.
Moving on to item 12, are there any consent agenda items to be considered by council?
Councillor Gaffney.
I'd like for us to consider 2020-028 and 2020-030.
So you want to start with 2.8? If we could deal with them individually. So the first one you wanted to deal with was 028?
Yep.
That's a resolution from the Perth County Federation of Agriculture requesting support for security from trespass, Protecting Food and Safety Act. Counselor Clifford will second that. Discussion, Counselor Seven.
Yeah, I want to speak against the endorsing of the motion here. I think this bill is in my opinion, under the guise of protecting the farmers, the food security and things. And it's very similar to bills that have been struck down in the United States, where organizations that go into the farms undercover and uncover criminal acts that are actually pursued legally and people are convicted, they would be charged for doing things like that, and they wouldn't be allowed to expose a very already secretive state of animal welfare. So I just want to speak against that.
Thank you. Any further, Counselor Vasilakos?
I'm going to speak against it as well, simply because we already, I think that this bill has a lot of, it's fairly politically motivated. There are already laws in place that actually deal with a lot of these issues. I think it's a superfluous law, and I don't think that it's actually necessary. It's adding laws to already existing laws. So I don't think we should be supporting it.
Counselor Clifford?
Well, I support it because I think it protects the farmer and animal safety. So I think I've had calls on this, even though I'm not out in the country. I've had people that are extremely concerned about people coming onto farms without authorization.
Thank you. Anything further? Counselor Vasilakos?
And I will point out there are already laws that deal with this, but I will also point out that we have a growing program of things like puppy mills and kitty mills out in the country, and we've been absolutely unable to actually deal with any of these. And these kinds of laws only make it even harder to identify some of these. There are already laws in place to take care of trespassers on private property. I don't think this is necessary.
Okay. All right, all those in favor of the motion? Opposed, if any? All right, we didn't have everyone vote. So all those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that motion's carried. Item 030 was your second one, Counselor Gaffney? Seconder,
Same thing.
Counselor Clifford?
It's the same.
All right,
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
it's adding grain farm operations. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Moving on to item 13, new business. Are there any new business items?
Counselor Vasilakos?
This is kind of a piggybacking. I'd like to refer something to infrastructure, transportation, and safety, but also to staff. We just turned down a pilot study for 40 kilometers an hour, but we have a number of data that actually shows that we do have a number of areas where we have speeding problems in the city. We have people that are speeding both on our collector and arterial roads. We have really excessive speeds that are happening in our residential neighborhoods. And I would like us, it's clear we have to do something. We have to have a conversation around enforcement, because I think these are accidents waiting to happen. At the speeds that are clocked, that Councillor Ingram just pointed out, all of those trips, if somebody was hit, no one survives. And I think that if we know that data exists and we have no plan on how we're going to address what is, one, clearly breaking the law and increasing or decreasing safety to the public, we need to actually take that seriously and actually have another look at what we're planning on doing and how we're going to address that what the data is clearly showing us. So referral back to staff and to infrastructure, transportation, and safety to look at some measures that we might apply.
Seconder for the referral. Counselor Clifford, thank you. It's a referral, so thanks. All those in favor? And that's unanimous, thank you. Counselor Seven?
Just to follow up on that, with the original report regarding the 40-kilometer speed limit, there was also the original option, one of them was in school zones. And so will that be coming back? How does that work now going forward?
Madam Clerk, do you want to answer the question on the logistics of whether that comes back?
So through your worship, could you please just repeat the question?
The original option at subcommittee was 40-kilometer in school zones, or the motion that was just turned down. So will the original option for school zones be coming back to council then?
Through you, your worship, at this time, unless there is a motion from council now, the item would not come forward unless
you.
directed further. But there is a
Thank you. And I had something unrelated, but
Okay, thank you. Councillor Zazelakos?
I was just going to say, we already have a motion that's with staff to create community safety zones around schools, and some of those added measures around speed and other measures. So I think that's a separate item that we've already approved to come back, and it'll actually deal with school zones, hospital zones, parks, I believe. So it actually expands on that. So I don't know that it would be necessary to do that when we have a report coming back on that.
It will come back as part of the broader one.
okay, thank you. And I just had a question regarding the recycling program.
I did to dump it, but.
Given the reports that have been out there about 90% of plastic recycling ends up in landfills eventually, do we have any clauses in our recycling program that say if it doesn't get processed the way we're expecting, is there anything that would affect the contract that way? If the recycling's not being recycled?
Through the chair, the way the agreement, if you may recall, with our processor, we ended up eliminating a number of plastic products because there was no market for it. So we're just simply not collecting it anymore. So if some of that material does end up there, what happens is it'll end up as waste, and then there's a charge back to the municipality for that as they dispose of that material.
Okay, thank you. I guess what I'm asking is if the material they are accepting, if we found out it was just being dumped in a landfill somewhere, is there anything that guarantees it's being recycled and processed that way?
Through the chair, I'll have to look into it. I mean, we do have requirements. I mean, you do provide reports to us with respect to how the material is being processed and where they take it. I will say that our processor is owned by a number of municipalities. They own they own the actual processor. They're the owners of it. So I think they have a vested interest to make sure that their facility is properly handling the materials that they're recycling.
Great, thank you.
All right. Anything further? If not, we'll take a motion to recess and reconvene in the Planning and Heritage Committee open session. Councillor Gaffney and seconded by Councillor Seven. All those in favor? It's carried. We'll take a brief recess and we'll come right back.
Any disclosures of pecuniary interests? Seeing none. Subcommittee minutes are attached. Delegations, none scheduled. Item 5, report of the Manager of Development Services, and 5.1 is possible approaches to regulate short-term rental accommodations in the new comprehensive zoning bylaw. And so there are 2 recommendations there for your,
I will move the subcommittee recommendations.
okay, so you're going to move both recommendations?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and second, Councillor Vasilakos. Discussion. Councillor Henderson.
Well, I just wanted to question when it was in the report about, I believe it's other cities are using the 180 days, because that covers the snowbirds. I don't know how many leave from Stratford and rent their houses out. So I just wondered why we didn't go with what other people are doing.
Mr. Lunison, do you want to come forward and address that question, maybe others?
I did see that other people didn't have an issue with it, but I just wondered if we're, you know, I don't know how many in Stratford are snowbirds, so.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm not 100% sure why 120 days was used. Some of the background information we had in preparing this report was a report prepared by Airbnb. And in the report prepared by Airbnb, one of the categories was that they had used was less than 120 days and more than 120 days. So I think that that is where the 120 days may have
Okay.
originated, but maybe other members of the committee might, put the motion on the floor, might know for sure.
Councillor Vasilakos.
If I recall from subcommittee's discussion, one of the things that it does, it allows people that may actually have a seasonal property like a cottage over that cottage season to actually rent out their property if they choose to, but 120 days is still short enough so that it doesn't start to actually affect the long-term rental market and our affordable housing stock in terms of rental. And I believe someone who spoke at that committee said 120 days they could work with, like one of the members of the public said where they're interested in it, said we'll work with whatever you do. So we kind of, the discussion sort of circled around some of these issues, and that's where it landed.
Councillor Seven.
Yeah, I do support the motion. I guess I read in the discussion in the minutes about enforcement, but I guess I just don't see it practical to enforce, really, and I just wondered if you could speak to that a little bit more.
Thank you, through the chair. I think enforcement is going to occur in cooperation with the service providers, the Airbnbs, the Wikipedias, and so on. They will also be required to obtain a license, and they will track for us how many nights are rented per year. That's a similar model to what's being used in other municipalities.
If I could follow up, do
Councillor
we have a framework for what would happen, or maybe that's not in place yet, if somebody's operating an Airbnb, they don't have a license or something like that, would it be like a fine, or what would happen then?
I think that you're correct, Councillor Tubman, and that would be established through the licensing process. The penalties will be included in that. It may be a fine, it may be a ticket, or maybe other action that is yet to be determined.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Seeing none, both motions have been moved and seconded. I will call the question. All in favor? And that's unanimous. Project updates are there. And a motion to adjourn. Councillor Beatty and Councillor Seven, all in favor? And we're adjourned. Thank you.
That'd be me. I'd like to call the Social Services Committee to order. Any declarations of pecuniary interest in the general nature therefore? Seeing none. You see the subcommittee meetings are there. Delegations, there's none scheduled. Number 5 is report of the manager of Ontario Works. This is about the municipal funding target and policy changes, the MCCSS funding. Is there anything you wanted to talk on this about, Kim?
Just that we're putting forward the 5 recommendations for review at this point, and that we are seeing similar recommendations across the province and other CMSNs.
Thank you. So, Councillor Gaffney's moving it.
I am, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Vacalasas is seconding it. Any comments or questions about this? All in favor? Carried. A summary of the Eat, Play, Learn program. I hope you all had a chance to read that. It's a great little program that we're doing here in the city. Councillor Bunting is moving it, and Councillor Vacalasas is seconding it. Any comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. 5.3, this is the Family Staff Perth Huron Agreement, that the mayor and acting clerk be authorized to enter an agreement with the Family Services Perth Huron to develop a counseling program to Social Services Department participants as outlined in the agreement. Councillor Ingram is moving it, and Councillor Ritzma is seconding it. Any questions or comments on this? All in favor? Carried. Looking for adjournment. Councillor Clifford and Councillor Gaffney are seconding it. All in favor? Carried.
Whenever you're ready, Madam Clerk, we'll let Councillor Henderson get back to her seat.
Through you, your worship, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest to be restated at the reconvene portion?
Seeing none.
Through your worship, it's my understanding the final item for consideration is the confirmatory bylaw.
Councillor Vasilakos is moving and seconded by Councillor Ingram that the confirmatory bylaw 11.5 be read a first and second time. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Third and final reading is Councillor Clifford and Councillor Gaffney for the confirmatory bylaw 11.5. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. An adjournment of this evening's meeting, Councillor Sebin and Councillor Ingram. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you.